All right, this is Daf Yomi in motion number 807. Today we're going to learn Daf Pei Zayin in Metzia, and we're going to be speaking about Poalim HaOchlim, Poalim that are working and being allowed to eat what they're being oisik in. Gemara begins on Pei Zayin, two lines down from the top. I said, we're in the middle of speaking about the Psukim in the Maisa with Avram Avinu, with the Malachim. They came to visit him. So he says, Kosiv, it says in the Pasuk, V'yikcho pas lechem. So, Pasuk said, V'ekcho pas lechem, V'sadu libchem, Acher ta'avru. So Avram Avinu was telling the Malachim to take some food and then go on your way. Since you came by me, let me give you some food. Even there's another pasuk that says, "Ve'el habokor ratz Abraham." Abraham went to the herdsman to get some meat. So we see he offered them pas, and in the end he gave them a whole meal of meat. So Amar Rebbe Elazar, "Mekan shetzadikim omrim ma'at va'oisim arbe." They only say they commit themselves to a small amount, but they do a lot. Rishoyim omrim arbe ve'afilu ma'at einam oisim. In the Rishoyim, they say they'll do a lot, and they don't even do a little bit. Minolan, where do we know this? Then, where do we see this from? A guy with the Rishoyim, Ephron Achiti. He offered Abraham the Morata Machpelah for 400, and then the possible to take, that is accepted in all places. So Miyakor Ksiv, it says, all it said was Eretz Abba Me'os Shekel Kosef. He's going to take Abba Me'os Shekel. It just doesn't say which type of mintage. So the Besoif Ksiv says V'yishma Abraham El Ephron, he heard what he had to say. V'yishkoil Abraham le'Ephron es hakesef asher diber be'ozne b'nei ches, which Ephron had spoken out in front of everybody. Arbo ma'ois shekel kesef oivel asoifer. Meaning the best type of coinage that can be, that everyone will accept even far away. Because in the end, he wasn't willing to accept anything less than that. The lo shakel minei ella kantore. He only took kantore. Kantore is what they call shkolim in another place. So we see he took shkolim, which is called the coinage, which is called shkolim even in other places. Ikaduch de dekaru le litikle Kantero. So that's the word for shkolim, which in other places also. Universal shkolim. Ksiv, it says, Kemach v'ksiv soilis. So we see here in the pasuk that it says that Abraham Avinu ran into the tent and told Sarah to begin preparing. So it says, Vayimahir Abraham ha'oelo el Sarah v'yomer mehari Mahari shlosh sein kemach soilis lushe va'ase ugos. So take 3 soyim kemach, and it says soilis. So it's like take 3 soyim. So she's like said what, kemach? No, he said no, soilis. So Gemara said that from here we learn that she wanted to take kemach, the cheaper type, the cheaper grade of flour. He told her, no, take the best grade, the refined flour. So here they want to learn, Ksiv Kemach, Ksiv Soilis. Omar Rav Yitzchak Mekan Sha'isha Tzara Einei Be'orchim Yoter Min Ha'ish. That the woman tends to be more tzar'ayim when it comes to the guests than the man. Ksiv, it says that he told her that it should be lushe, Va'ase ugos, so knead them up and make ugos, make cakes or breads. Ugos. V'ksiva says It says v'yikach chamia v'cholov. It says that Avraham Avinu took the whatever he prepared. He took the butter and the cholov and the milk, ben bakar, and then he took the ben bakar. And then he took the meat. First they eat the chalav, and then they eat the meat. That's muter. They ate the chalavi first. The ilu lechem lo aisei l'kmai. He doesn't say that he brought the bread. Where'd the bread go? So Omar Ephraim maksho talmidai shel Rebbe Meir mishmei the Rebbe Meir. They asked. This question was asked. Abraham Avinu oichel chulin b'tayra haya. He used to eat all of his food b'tayra, even if it was just chulin. It wasn't hektish. Wasn't kodesh. The Sarah imenu oiso yom pirsa nida. Since they said that she's going to become young again, she became young and she started having her period again. So she was pirsa nida, and therefore the isa that she was kneading became tamei. So since Avraham Avinu wouldn't have eaten his chulin b'tameya, he didn't want to serve it to guests either when the breads were tamei. Pasuk says, "Yomru Eliv, aye sorry ishtecha. Where's your wife? The Omar hine ba'oil. So he said she's in the tent. Lodia, why did they say this? Lodia shesara imenu tsunua. He said she was a tsunua. She wasn't around. They didn't see her at all. They had to ask where she was. Omar Rav Yehuda, Omar Rav, v'yitem a Rebbe Yitzchak, yoidim hayu malachei hashayris shesara imenu ba'oil. He said they knew where she was. So why do they have to ask where she is? Elamai ba'oil. Why do they have to say where is she ba'oil? Today, the chovva al bala, so that her husband should love her, since she was going to now have a baby, and he should appreciate her. It says in the other Meforshim that he felt that maybe the reason they hadn't had children was that because she wasn't so into hachmasas orachim as he was, as we just saw that she wanted to give kemach, he wanted to give soilus. And therefore, he felt maybe that was why Hashem was holding back the children from her. And they wanted him to realize that she has other qualities besides hachmasas orchim. Her tznius is roy. She's roy beglal her tznius to have a children, not just because she has to be a machnesas orchim. So they wanted him to appreciate that in her. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina Omar. They had Mistama had a zimun, and they want to send the wife koshel bracha to taste from it. 20, learning in the Brisa, Mishum Rebbe. We learn in a Brisa, 20 Mishum Rebbe Yossi. Lama nokur al iyu, from the lashon shebe'elu, as the pasuk said. It says Eliv, ayei sora, a love, without the lam, and ayu, a love. There's nikudot on the aleph yud vav, without the lamed, shebe'elu, a love to him. So without that, it's like to them, ayu, v'yomer ayu, to them. Where is Sarah? So they darshan. Why is there a nikudah on that? We're supposed to darshan that. Lim the Torah derech eretz. It's come to teach us that we're supposed to darshan that, to teach us a lesson in derech eretz. Sheyishal adam b'achsan yishalo. You should ask, how's the wife doing? The achsan yishalo. Rashi says that is the Ashes Oshpiza, the wife of the one who's of his host. Ask how she's doing. When you go to somebody's house, ask how everybody is, and inquire about the family that you care, to show that you care about who's having you over. Shmuel told us that you're not supposed to say shalom to a woman at all. So how come here we're supposed to be learning that you're supposed to say inquire about the wife. And for the Gemara, Ayidei Bala Shani, it's different if you ask the husband, how's your wife? That's different. Rashi says Ayidei Bala. Rashi, in the narrow lines of Rashi down, about 10 lines, it says, Lo lishol lo l'shalom. Don't ask a woman, how is she? Il Bala yishal ma shalom ageveres. How's the wife doing? Gemara says, the Gemara then quotes the last of the narrow lines of the Gemara. Achrei, Pasuk said that Sarah laughed when she found out that she was going to have a baby, and she said, Acharei beloisi haisali Edina Adoni Zokim. So she said, after that she felt she was all like worn out because she aged, her skin was wrinkled. She's going to have soft skin. So Omarab Chisto Achar Shinis Bala Habasa. What did that mean? Bola. It says Acharei Boloisi. What did that mean? That after she would be worn out. So the husband was after her skin would be aged and wrinkled. V'rabu ha kitmoyen, and the wrinkles became a lot. There was a lot of wrinkles. So then nisaden, and then her skin became stretched and it became smooth. Nisaden habasar, nispashtu hakitomin, and then these wrinkles straightened out, flattened out. And then the beauty came back. Because of the pasuk says, "V'adoni zokin." So she said after she's been aged and her skin was wrinkled, and is she going to become young again? And her husband is old. Is a zokin. The Ksiva says, "V'ani zokanti," because when Hashem spoke to Abraham and said, "Why did Sarah laugh?" And she told me, "V'ani zokanti." So Hashem changed the lashon because she really said "V'adoni zokin." You can see "V'ani zokanti." To loy Moshe b'Kodesh Baruch Hu k'deka'amra ihi. Hashem, when speaking to Abraham Avinu, did not say the way Sarah said. He changed it and said that she said about herself that she was old. So, and that's why she was laughing. Tanu Debei Rabbi Yishmael, Gadol Shalom. How great is Shalom that Shafilu Kodesh Baruch Hu Shina Bo. That even there we saw that Hashem changed from what was really said in order that Abraham Avinu shouldn't feel nifka from what Sarah said. Shneimar, because it said, the pasuk, "V'titzchak Sarah b'kirbo," she laughed in her heart about how she was going to become young again and have a child. Leimor acharei b'loisi hoisoli edna v'adoni zokem. That's what she said. Ksiv, it says that when Vayomer Hashem el Abraham, Loma ze sochakos Sarah leimor ha'af umnam eled va'ani zokanti. Will I really give birth and I'm so old? That's what she said. Va'ani zokanti. And the pasuk says that like Abraham was. They said Vayomer vatoimer mi milel la Abraham. Who would say that Abraham Henika bonim Sarah, that his wife would be ma'anik children, ki yoladati ven zukunai, that were born for Abraham when he was old. Who would say such a thing, that it could come about? So the Gemara says, Henika bonim. Sarah, kama bonim Henika. What do you mean bonim? Plural. How many children did she have? She had one. So Hanikas kama bonim Hanika Sarah. Omer Rebbe Levi. Oiso hayom shegomal Abraham as Yitzchak, like 2 years after when he stopped nursing. Yitzchak Beno. Also Suda Gedoyla. He had a huge Suda when she stopped nursing. Ayukol Umas Oilam Raninim. They were all laughing at Sarah and Abraham during these times. But Omrim Risem Zokim Vizakena She'aviu asufim minashuk, that they found a child somewhere and they brought it and they raised it as their own. Omrim benenu, and they're saying who, and they're claiming that it's their child. Lord, not only that, but they're having a big mishnah in order to prove that it's really their son, to convince everybody. Maso Abraham Avinu, what did he do? Holach v'ziman kol gedolei ador. He invited all the chashuvim of the generation. V'sori imenu zimna es nishoseihem. Invited all their women. V'kol achas v'achas evia bona ima minikosa lo evia. And they brought all their young children, their babies, and they left their maid servants at home. And then Hashem made a nace with Sarah Imenu, v'niftechu dideya kishnei mayonos, and her breast, she was able to nurse all of these children. V'hanika es kulon v'dayin hayu, and even after all that everybody realized that Sarah could have a baby herself because she was young and she was able to nurse, and she mashma that she did have a baby if she still had milk. They were still making fun of Sarah and Abraham Avinu. Miraninim, the Omrim, Im Sarah, Habas Tishim Shana, Taylid, if she, good, maybe she had given birth, she's 90. Abraham, Ben Meir Shana, Yoilid. What was Abraham? He was 100. Could he be the father? Mustami, he wasn't the father. Miyad at that moment, Miyad and Hafach classed their pony shall Yitzchak. At that moment, the face changed on Yitzchak to look exactly like his father's. Abraham, and it was just like his father's. Poschu kulam, everyone, the Omru, and that moment everybody admitted that the child looks just like his father, and this is definitely your child. Abraham, Hoilides Yitzchak, that they all declared. They all admitted and declared. Ad Abraham, we're in the Gemara, in the wide lines of the Gemara, right in the middle of the wide lines of Gemara. Ad Abraham, Loya Zikna. Until Abraham, there was no aging. Man dahavi boy li mishtoi behadi Abraham. Mishtoi behadi Yitzchak. He would make a mistake and think he would end up talking to Yitzchak and think he's talking to Abraham. Behadi Yitzchak, mishtoi behadi Abraham. And if you want to speak to Yitzchak, he would think that he's talking to Yitzchak and he's really speaking to Abraham. Also, Abraham boy rachmei bahavi zikna. Hashem, and then Abraham daven, it was getting out of hand. He davened that there should be a difference between them. So it would be recognizable who's the father and who's the son. So he davened, and then it came aging, that he should look older than Yitzchak. Shnei, as it says, Abraham zokin bo bayomim, that he was an old elderly, and he came towards the end of his life. Ad Yaakov. Lo havi chusha, up until Yaakov, there was no sickness in the world. Also Yaakov, the boy rachame, v'havi chusha. Yaakov davened that there should be sickness in the world. Why? Because that people should know when they're coming to the end of their life and be able to write their will, so that they'll know where how their estate will be given out. Shneimar, as it says, Vayomer li Yosef, Hine avicha cholet, and they told Yosef that his father was sick, and he was able to go and to get the brachos. Ad de'asa Elisha lo havi decholish v'ispakeach. There was no, up until Elisha, there was no getting sick and getting better from the sickness. There was getting sick, but there was no recovery from sickness. Also, Elisha boy rachme v'istafeach. Elisha davened that it should be possible to get better after getting sick. Shneimar, as it says, "Elisha chola es cholio asher yomus bo." That Elisha got sick, the sickness which ultimately killed him. Mashma that he had been sick before and it didn't kill him, and this was the sickness that killed him. That's what the Gemara says. Mechlal de chole achrisi, that he had other sicknesses that didn't kill him. Tana Rabbana, we learn in the Brisa, Shlosha Chaloyin Chola Elisha. Elisha got sick 3 times, and the last one killed him. Echad Shedichofai had he le ginze b'shtei yodai. I guess ginze, he wanted to do tshuva, and Elisha be'echad shegira doivin b'tunaikas. There were tunaikas that were mitzar Elisha. They were making fun of him and bothering him. Elisha sent bears after them. He got sick from that. The Echad Shemetzba, on the last sickness is what he died from. Shneimaz, it says, Elisha chola es cholio asher yomus ba. So chola, that's the first sickness. Es cholio, the second. Asher yomus ba was it like the third. So he got sick 3 times. Mishnah told us on Daf Pei Gimel Amud Aleph, Ela'ad shelo yitchilu b'malacha tzev omar lahem. The father told his son to go back and tell the workers before they start working that they're only going to be provided with a meal of bread and beans and not more. So Omar le Rab Acha Brei de Rab Yosef le Rab Chista. When it says pas v'kitnius, does it mean pas and kitnius, or does that mean pas kitnius, pas made out of ground beans? Out of bean flour, that has pas kitnius tanan or pas vikitnius tanan. Which one is it? So Reb Chista told him it's pashit, that it's pas vikitnius. Amalei HaOchlim, it's like lashon of mean of course. Tzricha vad, the vav is supposed to be there. Ki mordei delivaros, like those who go down to the river, the river boats, that they have a big stick that pushes the boat down the river and keeps the boat off of from hitting the rocks. That big stick should be a big vav in there, separating between the pas and kitnius. In the Mishnah said that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said that there was no reason to go and to renegotiate with the workers. There wouldn't have been any chiyuv to pay them more than what is the minhag of Medina anyway. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Enu tzarich. Hakol kiminhag Medina. So what does it mean? Hakol, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, what did the Hakol come to include? So Hakol asuyimai, what does that come to include? Hakol kiminhag Medina. What minhag are we referring to over there? La suyiha ditani. We learn in the Brisa. Hasoyichem es hapayil. Whoever hires a worker, Omar lo ke'echad u'kishnai mebnei ha'ir. And he says, I will pay you like 1 or like 2 of the people of the city. Smashma, he's paying like a double wage over here, like 2 wages, like 2 people for 2 people. So noisin lo. And so like 1 person's wage or like 2 people's wage or like double. So what do you pay him? So noisin lo kipachois shebe schilus. Dibber Rebbe Yeshua. That you give him the less amount of what seems that he was agreeing to. Chachamim Omri, no, you don't give the less. You just take the average. Take the average between 1 poil and 2 poilim. You average it down. Mishamnin beinehem. You take what it would come out, and for like 2 workers, and you take the average between. So what their first shot is you go according to if there's a difference in how much a worker takes for that job, you go, and he now is saying that he wants to pay like 2. Rashi says, up from the Mishnah, for Omar lo balabayas. That's all he says. It's like 1 of the poilei ha'ir. So there are different poilim work for different amounts for this job. So we go according to the Rebbe Yeshua. You take the least of how much poil would take for this job. And according to the Chachamim, you look at the average of how much a poil would take for this job. All right. Zakta Hilka Mishnah. Ve'elu HaOchlim min haTorah. This is the people that when they're doing a job, they're allowed to take from what their what they're oisik in, to eat from what they're oisik in. We're talking about someone who's working on produce from that grows from the ground. Elu HaOchlim in a Torah, the Torah allows them to eat as they're working. HaOisei b'mechub lekarka, meaning those that are working on produce which is still attached to the ground. So there's certain circumstances that they are allowed to eat from that produce as they're working on it. Their job is detaching the produce. They're harvesting it. Shas Gemar Malacha. So the Gemar Malacha by them is the detachment of the fruit from the ground, and they're then allowed to eat from it at that stage. Ubitalush minakarka. Sometimes a person is hired just to work with perus which were detached already from the ground, and they're allowed to eat from it. Ad shelo nigmar malachto, meaning before it comes to this stage, like before they pile it up, or before they pack it into a level of that it will become chayav meiser, then they're allowed to eat from it. And here we're talking about things which grow, only things which grow from the ground. There are certain jobs when a person is working that he's not allowed to eat from what he's working with. Also, in both cases, when a person is working with something which is mechubel lekarka, but his job is not to detach it, his job is just to work with the produce which is attached to the field, meaning he's weeding it, or he's doing other jobs to this plant, but he's not harvesting it. He's not allowed to to pick it off and to eat from that. Because he's working with it at the time when it won't be detached. Sometimes a person can be working with produce which is already detached and still not be allowed to eat from it because maybe it came already to the stage of Gemar Malacha that it became chayav meiser, and then he's not allowed to eat from it. Ubitalush min akarka ma'achar shenigmar malachto, and it became chayav meiser. Ubidavar she'ein gidulo min ha'aretz, also he's also to eat as if he's being oisek in things which didn't grow from the ground, like if he's milking cows or if he's churning the milk into butter, into cheese. He's not allowed to eat from those things. Zak the Gemara, where do we know that in the case where a person is working with gedulei karka, that he's allowed to eat from it when he detaches it? Because it says, Ki sovo b'kerem re'echa, when it says when a person will come to the vineyard of his friend, and he will eat anovim, he'll eat from the grapes. So therefore we see he ate from the grapes. They darshan, Rashi says in the last wide line of Rashi, Ki sovo v'ochalta anovim. The common they darshan later on, that this coming into the vineyard means he's a worker, and that's what they understood this person is talking about. So he's a worker, and he was allowed to eat from the grapes. The Rashi says, the Kama Dorish lay the poil, the Sefer Dikra, on the end of that pasuk, the El Kilecho Lo Siten. It says, don't put any of these grapes into your own vessel and take it home. But as you're working with the grapes, you can eat them as you're working, but don't put them into your kli and take them home. Mashma Lo Siten. Mashma that he can't put it into his own vessel. Ella Likelaiv Shel Balabayas Titen. Mashma, don't put it into your own kli, but you can and you should be putting it into the owner's kalim. Alma b'shas gmar meleches chiburan kai. So we saw from that pasuk that they were talking about that he was harvesting the fruit, and that's why we're talking about putting it into the kalim. And so that showed that he was allowed to eat it when he was harvesting it, when he detached it from its chibur to the ground. So the Gemara says, well, that's fine. Now we know at least that workers that are working on a vineyard are allowed to eat as they harvesting it. But what about every other type of produce that people work with? So we said, Ashkachan, we find therefore Keren that the poil is allowed to eat. Mili minolan. Where did we know that every type of produce the worker is allowed to eat when he detaches it? Minolan. And for the Gemara, we learn it from Keren. Gamrin and Mekarim. We just learn it from Keren. Ma Keren. Miyuchad Dibar shigedule karka, davar shigedule karka, it grows from the ground. Ubishas gemar malacha, poil oichelbo. And we saw that at the time when it's detached from the ground, the poil was allowed to eat it, as long as he didn't put it into his own vessel. So we can say that should apply to every produce that a person is working with. So afkol davar shigedule karka, bishas gemar malacha, poil oichelbo. Fine, that's where we could learn it out from. Gemara says, no, we can't learn it from there because maybe the reason why we saw that the poil who's working with a karim, with anovim, is allowed to eat is because with karim there's a special din, with anovim, grapes, that if any clusters are left over, you can't pick them up. You have to leave them there for the anim. So since maybe poalim are like anim, so maybe there they get the privilege to eat as they're harvesting grapes. But maybe in other types of produce they don't have the din of oleilos, of leaving over clusters that were left behind. Maybe there won't be a heter for Poalim to eat from them as they're working on them. That's what the Gemara Shaila is. Malakarim, shechein chayav b'oleilos. So gamrin, right. So maybe it's only by anavim, but not by all produce. Gemara says, no, we can learn that it can apply to produce other than anavim, because if we look at standing fields of grain, grain fields, we see that it has similar. It's also that a worker is allowed to eat as he's harvesting grain fields, standing stalks. So then that shows that it's not just anavim, and the standing stalks don't have any din of aleilos. So maybe we could learn from the combination of grapes and standing stalks. More says gamrinan mikama. Let's learn it from Kama. Kama doesn't have a leilos, and yet we saw there's a pasuk that says that the workers are allowed to eat from the kernels of the wheat. Gemara says Kama itself has a problem because Kama is used to make flour with, which then has to have challah taken from it. The challah has to be given to the kohen. So maybe since that the challah, you have to give from it to the kohen to support the kohen, give him matanas. So maybe that's why the poil who's working on it also gets to take from it. So then we wouldn't know to all other places that a poil that's working on produce gets to take from it at the time when he harvests it. So Kamagufa has a problem with it. The Gemara asks, so Kamagufa Minon, look at where we learn Kama from B'chlal. Where do we learn that standing stalks that the poil is allowed to take it? It's allowed to take it as he's harvesting it. If you look at that pasuk, you'll see that problem that we just mentioned. The comment also, the chesiv, it says, Kisavo bekomas re'echa. When a person will come into the field of his friend, and they darshan that it's talking about a poil, and he will then harvest it, tafta, and he'll cut it off. Melilois, he'll take like kernels and he'll eat them. Biarcha, and he can eat them. So he's allowed to eat them. Malakama, right? So then maybe we could learn at least that grapes is not the only thing that the poil can eat as he's harvesting it. The Gemara says there's a problem with Kama also. That Kama has that problem that maybe it's only with Kama that poilim are allowed to eat from, because it's given partially, it has challah. When it's made into flour, it's given to the ganim. So maybe there the poilim have the right to eat from it as they're harvesting it. Malakama shechein chayeves b'challah. Maybe that's what gives the poil the right. But maybe by other things like olives and all other types of produce, maybe we won't find that a poil can, as he's harvesting it, can eat from it. Why should we say umimai? The high comma more asks, why do you say that when the pasuk mentioned the standing stalks, fields of grain, that it's talking about all standing produce, which is chayav challah? There's different types of standing stalks. There's standing bean stalks. There's other types of produce that don't have a chiyuv of challah b'chlal. So mimai the high comma the mechayeves b'challah. Because by saying that we're dealing with standing stalks that are chayav b'challah, so then we are saying that we don't have a makor to learn that poilim that are harvesting produce can eat from it. So we would have only seen it by anovim and by like grains, but not all over the place. Gemara says, how do we know that pasuk which is talking about the grains is talking about grains which are chayav b'challah? Maybe it's talking about kama that is not mechayeves b'challah. Gemara says, How do you know that we're talking about kama that is mechayev is chalahi? Dilma kol kama. Maybe it just means all standing produce which a poil is working on, that he will have the right to eat from it as he's harvesting it. Kama rachmana. And for the Gemara, no, we learn that the pasuk which is talking about kama and how the poil has a right to, is eating from it. We have a Zer Shava Kama from another part. One pasuk we know for sure that it's talking about a wheat field or a barley field, which is Chai B'chala, and we then have a Zer Shava to the other pasuk. So we know that the pasuk of Kama is talking about a crop that is Chai B'chala. Asya Kama. Ksiva says, Hocha here, Ki Tavu B'kamas Re'echa, like we read. Ksiv Hosam Lagabi the omer, Lagabi barley, siren, that it says the machil chermesh bekama. It's talking from the time when the sickle starts cutting down the barley for the korban omer. Then they count 7 shvuos. From the time maybe makr the korban omer, just after Pesach. So that's a crop that is chaya b'chala, barley. So ma'asam kama dimechayev b'chala, and we have the word kama. So also in the other pasuk, which we has the word kama, we have Gzer Shava that will also be referring to a crop that is chaya b'chala. So av hocha nami kama dimechayev b'chala, and therefore we're only going to know that Poalim can eat when they're harvesting from anovim and from grains, which are chaya b'chala, but not from all other types of produce. So that's. And the Gemara says, at least we'll be able to go back and forth between grapes and grains. Ika lemifrach, you can ask on the case of the standing stalks from Ika lemifrach. You can ask on that malakama shechin chayves b'chala, that maybe is the reason why the poil is allowed to eat from it. And then we could be yochiach. We can prove otherwise by showing the anovim that that's something that doesn't have chala, and the poilim are allowed to eat from the grapes. Kerem, yochiach will prove that it's not only produce, which is chayav b'chala. So mala kerem shechein, and you can ask the shaila the other way. You might think that the poilim are allowed to eat from the kerem because it's chayav b'oleilos, and we could prove that it's not only crops like that from kama that doesn't have oleilos, chayav b'oleilos. So kama tochiach would prove that it's not only crops that are chai ba'oleilos, but nevertheless we only have these two korot, and we'd have what's the common denominator between them. The chozor din would go back and forth between the grapes and the kama and the grain. Hadin lo re'izeh k're'izeh. So now we come out with the common denominator between the two. Atzad shava. What's equal between them? Shebehen shechein davar shegedulei karka, they grow from the ground. True. Ubishas gemar malacha poil oichelbo, and we saw that at the time when he's harvesting it, the poil is allowed to eat from it. So we would then learn that should apply to all other cases. Av kol davar shegedulei karka the bishas gemar malacha poil oichelbo. We think that we could learn from there out to all other places in the Torah that could be the makor where we saw in our Mishnah that the poil is allowed to eat when from the produce that he's being oisek in at the time when he's harvesting it. Gemara says not necessarily. Maybe maybe it's only grapes and grains. Ma'ala tzad shava sheben. If you look at their tzad shava, they have another tzad shava that they are commodities that are used on the mizbeach. The wine is used for nisu chayayin, and the kemach is used for the menachos. Ma le'atzad shava sheben shechem yesh ben tzad mizbeach. They have a tzad mizbeach. They have usage on the mizbeach. So you might think maybe the time when the poil is allowed to eat as he's harvesting is only in those types of crops that are used on the mizbeach. So also nami zayas to also bought tzad mizbeach. So then maybe we should then add zayas at least, because that has a tzad mizbeach. But the Gemara, the zayas b'mama tzad osi. What would you think that we would need this ma'atzad from anovim and from grains to learn that a zayas, an olive, can be eaten as the poil is harvesting it? Hu gufa Kerem ikri. The olive is called kerem, and we learned before that a kerem is one of the places where the poil is allowed to eat as he's harvesting, and olives are called kerem. The conceived because it says v'yivar eish v'yivar migodish v'yaver migodish v'ad koma. You should this is like during Shvius, make sure all the food ad koma v'ad kerem zayas, all the way until, and also the kerem zayas. So we see a zayas is called an orchard, an olive orchard is called a kerem. So then that's alone, that should be included, that when Poalim are harvesting the grapes, they should be able to, the olives, they should be able to eat from the olives. More Rav Papa says, no, we needed to learn from a tzad shava for the olives. Omar Rav Papa, kerem zayas ikre, kerem stam lo ikre. Even though the pasuk said that the zayat was called a kerem zayas, but it's not just called a kerem. A stam kerem that we learned before that taught us that the poil was allowed to eat as he was harvesting them. It just said the word kerem. And that, we don't see that a kerem alone is referring to zaytim, to olives. So then we couldn't necessarily learn that it would, we couldn't necessarily learn that it was by itself that the kerem, the zayat, that the kerem would be, that the zayat would be included in the in this din that a poil is allowed to eat from it as he's harvesting it. More says, Mikol makom kasha. Nevertheless, even if we therefore would say that we need the zayat, we still have a kasha because all we have is 3 items that we would see that poilim are allowed to eat as they're harvesting, but not all crops. We wouldn't be seeing this din. Elo Omar Shmuel, where do we learn this din of our Mishnah that poilim are allowed to eat as they're harvesting, eat from the mechuber as they're detaching it from the ground? Omar Kro, the pasuk says the chermesh, says the pasuk chermesh. As we read it, it says ki savo b'komas re'echa, when a person will come into the standing field of his friend, kotafta, and he will be harvesting it. Melilais, he'll take kernels off. B'yodecha, in his hand. V'chermesh lo sonif al komas re'echa. He can take them individually, grains. He's allowed to, but he shouldn't start harvesting it and then eating them in a large scale. So there's a pasuk that says that. Omar Kro v'chermesh v'darshan. That's the rabbis call bali chermesh. Darshan from that pasuk of chermesh, Shmuel wants to say that's where we will learn this din that the poil is allowed to eat from all types of crops that he's harvesting. Any type of crop, chermesh, the rabbis call bali chermesh, anything that you're harvesting with a sickle, the poil is allowed to eat it. Therefore, we will have the makor. The Gemara says no. From that drasha, we cannot learn that it applies to all crops, that the poil is allowed to eat it. V'hai chermesh miboile b'shas chermesh o achol shlo b'shas chermesh lo ya tachil. We need that drasha chermesh for something else to teach us that when is the poil allowed to eat? When does he have his heter to eat? As he's detaching it. That's the time when he's allowed to eat. Therefore, that chermesh is not available for the drasha that all standing crops that are cut down with a chermesh, the poil can eat from it anymore, and therefore we would still be having to learn from the tzad, ma'atzad, and would still have our problem that we only know grapes, standing grains, and olives can be eaten as they're being harvested. Moore says, no, to learn when you're allowed to eat from the word chermesh at the time when they're being cut, we don't need that drasha because we know that drasha from another pasuk. It says, mive El kelecha lo sitain nafka. And it was from that pasuk that we had before, we could learn when the poil is allowed to eat from what he's harvesting at the time when you're putting it into into a kli, meaning when it's being detached. That's when you're allowed to eat like individual grapes. And therefore, once we don't need Chermesh to teach us that, so then Chermesh can come to be marbe, all crops that are cut down with a sickle. And therefore, we would have our makor, where poilim are allowed to eat from crops as they're harvesting them and that they're working with. Gemara says, Tinach davar chermesh. Oh, fine. That includes all crops that are cut down with a sickle. But what about crops like olives or other crops that are not cut down with a sickle? So what, Poalim, when they're working with them and detaching them, would not be able to eat from them because they're not a dover, a bar chermesh. So tinach dover the bar chermesh, to love bar chermesh. We know that a poil has a right to eat from something which is not cut with a sickle at the time of harvest. Elo Omer Rebbe Yitzchak, where do we know it from? Therefore, we combine. The limud comes from chermesh and koma. We look at it says chermesh, that which is cut with a chermesh, all things which are cut with a chermesh, and also from the word koma, we apply that. All types of standing stalks. Omar Kro, Rebbe Yitzchak said, Omar Kro koma. And from that, we are marbe, the rabbos, kol bali koma, everything that's there, not just grains, which are chay b'chala, all standing stalks which are harvested, the poil has the right to eat as he's harvesting them. More, we said before that pasuk was going on grains, which are chay b'chala. V'ha omrat kama to mechayev b'chala. So we weren't able to, that limited us to those types. And for the Gemara, when did we say that it was restricted to those that are chayiv b'chala, honey mealing? Mikmei dinese chermesh. Before we started talking about the chermesh, the pasuk which said that the drusha from chermesh said all crops which are marbe, everything which is cut down with a sickle. Once we said that chermesh comes to include many things beyond that all things other than the grapes and the olives and the grains. So hashta to osi chermesh isra bele called over once they from the drasha of chermesh we came to include anything which is cut with a sickle, even the afagav to lo mechayev b'chala, even if it's not the types that are chayev b'chala. So when we look at the other pasuk, when we say kama, so right, so kama nami lirabos, so the pasuk that said kama will also come to include other types of crops that are not chayev b'chala also. The rabbos kol bali kama. So now that's how we will learn that a poil which is harvesting things which are not chayev b'chala also will be able to eat them. And they don't just necessarily have to be cut down with a sickle either, because of koma. Because koma didn't say what they were being cut down with. Therefore, now we're learning from chermesh and koma. That poilim, when they're harvesting, can eat in small quantities from what they're harvesting. Hashta dinafgalan mechermesh umikama. So kitovo bekermer echo lamali. So the pasuk which spoke about the grapes originally, that when a person will be working on the kerem of his friend, he's allowed to eat from individual grapes. So what do we need that for? Now we know it already. On the Rava, the Hilchosab, to teach us halachos about that from that pasuk. Kidatani, we learn in the Brisa, kitovo. We see over there it says when a person will come, tovo. Kan bia, nema. So we see the coming is mentioned. Laholan later it says lo sovu olav hashemesh. We're gonna be paying a poil. Person who had a poil working for him shouldn't wait till the sun goes down before thinking about paying him. Should pay him at the end of his day. So that was definitely talking about a poil. So ma'ala halan b'poil, that's definitely talking about a poil. Hakosiv medaber. So af l'gabi the kerem with the grapes. Kan b'poil hakosiv medaber. That's also talking about a poil who's working in the vineyard. Medaber. B'kerem. Says b'kerem re'echa. When a person will come, a poil will come into the kerem of his fellow Jew. V'lo b'kerem goy. Not when meaning he's allowed to eat from, when it said he should not put into his own vessel, it was talking about the kerem in the kerem of a fellow Jew. V'lo b'kerem goy, but not in the kerem of a goy, because in the kerem of a goy, you are allowed, if a person is a poil there, to put some of the produce into his own vessel and take it home. So Gemara says, Ha-nicha limanda omer, gezel kuse aser. We can understand why this pasuk would have to come to teach us this halacha, that if a person is a poil for a goy, he is allowed to put it into his own vessel and take it home as he's working. According to the mandomer that says gezel akusi is aser. So we would need the pasuk to teach us that when he's a poil, however, he's allowed to take some. Then it wouldn't be aser because he's a poil. Because otherwise we would think it's aser because stealing from a goy is aser according to that mandomer. So haina de'itchi, that's why we need the pasuk kro lemishre poil, to matra poil, to take it into his some of that produce into his own vessel and take it home. However, el lamada omer gezel kusi muter, but according to the mandomer it says it's muter to gezel of a goy is muter. So then hashta gezeli muteres poil miboya. So if it's muter to stam steal from a goy, then why would the pasuk have to be telling us that when he's a poil, he's allowed to put it into his own vessel and take it home? It would be obvious. And for the Gemara, therefore, according to that man, the Omer mukim lo b'kerem re'echa. So therefore, according to that man, the Omer, we would say b'kerem re'echa, you are allowed to eat. Below shel hektish. We're not talking, according to that man, the Omer, we're not. This pasuk therefore is not talking about kerem. The diuk would not be to kerem of a goy. It's a kerem re'echa. You're allowed to eat in this derech arai way. But the lo shel hektish. But if it's a kerem of hektish, you can't even take small amounts and put them into your mouth. The Gemara says, v'yochalto, says, and you're allowed to eat. When we're dealing with a kerem of re'echa, you're allowed to eat. V'lo motzet. You can't suck the grapes and throw down the pits and the skins on the ground. Why not? Because that doesn't fill up the worker so much, and he has to eat a lot of grapes because he's just sucking out the juice from them, and he'll end up eating too much. No, the person has the right to eat the grapes, but he has to eat the whole grapes, so it won't end up being that he's eating so much and being mafsid the balabayas so much. Then it says anovim, he's allowed to eat anovim, v'lo anovim v'davrache, but not anovim together with some other condiment that helps him eat more anovim, because then he'll end up eating too much. He has to eat just the plain grapes and not together grapes with anything else. That make it easier to go down. And then it says he should eat kinafshecha, because the pasuk said, ki savo bekerem re'echa v'yochalta anovim b'nafshecha sovecha. B'nafshecha, to your satisfaction. It says ve'el kelech, but just don't put them into your own vessels. Kinafshecha, what does that mean? Kinefesh shel baal habayis. Kach nafsho shel poel. The poel, when he's eating, he should be like the baal habayis. What does that mean? Ma nafshecha oichel v'poter. Just as the baal habayis, when the baal habayis will eat in this arai way, temporary way, he doesn't have to. He's poter from meiser. So af nafsho shel poel oichel v'poter. He'll be oichel v'poter. You might think that since this is part of his wage, just when a person, even if a crop has not reached the Gemar Malacha, but if it's being sold, then it becomes a chiyuv. It's matal a chiyuv meiser on a produce, even if it didn't reach its Gemar Malacha, just the fact that it's being sold in that form. So you might think that since this is part of the worker's wage, that it's like a mekach, and that it will become chayev for meiser when he does eat in this way, as he's working. We come that it's, no, he's compared to the Balabais, just as the Balabais that would eat before it's come to its Gmar Malacha, and there will be no Chiyuv Meiser, so to the Poel won't have any Chiyuv Meiser also. Then it says, Sovecha can eat however, to your satisfaction. Lo Achila Gasa, but don't overeat. The Poel shouldn't stuff himself with grapes so that he won't have to eat a meal that day. No, just up until his satisfaction, he has the right to eat. More than that, it's also for him to eat. Don't start filling up your vessels and taking them home, all the grapes. So we learn from there that the time when it's being put into vessels, when he's putting it into his vessel, at the time when he's putting it into the vessel of the Balabayas, meaning he's harvesting and putting it into the vessels, Balabayas, Ata Oichel. That's when the Poel is allowed to be eating. But if it's not that stage of the malacha, he's at a different stage, not just the detaching stage, then the Poel is there, not allowed to be eating then. And that's the halachos. That's a hilchoisav that we're learning from the pasuk about the Karen. And we'll stop here.